In about 3 months, we will celebrate 13 years of having Gene return to Peoria, his hometown, where he now manages and is responsible for our 2 airports, the General Wayne A. Dowling Peoria International Airport and the Mount Holly Airport. Gene is a Peoria native, graduated from Peoria High School, golfed Madison golf course with me when we would ride our bikes over there. We traveled together to the Boundary Waters with Scouts. And in addition to the airport, Gene is actively involved in scouting today. He has 2 sons, Aaron and Grant, both of whom are Eagle Scouts. Met his wife, Andrea, when they were in Indiana. He was working in Evansville or Terre Haute. I don't know where you met, but she's from Indiana and you worked in Indiana. Okay. Gene is a graduate, Ashley, of Augustana College. One of the finest people that we could ever have in Peoria, and he's now heading our airports. Please join me in welcoming Gene Olson.
Well, I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd this morning, afternoon, and especially ones that if I say something wrong, they can correct me. So thank you for having me, and it's a great pleasure to be able to come and talk to you about basically what's going on at the airport. So the Airport Authority owns and operates 2 airports. I just call them shorthand, the big and the little, right? So the big airport is the General Wayne A. Downing Peoria International Airport, and you can see some of our key tenants that are there. An airport authority is kind of a strange creature. When you boil it down, we're kind of a very specialized kind of landlord. So we're the owner of the facility, and we operate it and take care of it so that our tenants can do their business. I don't get to pick where we fly. And I don't get to fly for free because everybody always wants to. The other airport we have is Mount Holly. It's a general aviation airport. It used to be called a reliever airport because the purpose of having a second airport like that is to draw the small airplanes away from the big airport so that you can preserve the capacity of the big airport for the commercial operations that take place there. And we see 2 very different groups. The people at Mount Holly don't want air traffic control towers. They want a little bit more independence, and the people that, and they don't need as many navigational aids. And the people at the big airport, even the general aviation ones, they want those services. They want air traffic control. Those 2 jets were at Mount Holly, and the larger one, the tail stuck up high enough that people could see that from Knoxville. And so people were actually lining the fence and taking pictures of it. It's not that common to have that big of a jet. That's a jet that can hop the Atlantic Ocean. And it was, I did some research to figure out, I kind of blurred out the N number, but I did some research to figure out who that was. And what it boiled down to was it was a company that owns, like at the time they owned K2 skis. If you're a fisherman, you know about Berkeley. All the different fishing products that they have. They own all that stuff. And I'm like, that didn't bring them to Peoria. Then I found out they're the largest processor of zinc in the United States. And they supply all the blanks for zinc pennies, for zinc, for the pennies, for the mint. And I was like, that's why they're here, because their CEO had to make a trip to Mossville, and this was the closest airport to get him to Mossville. So the moral of the story is, with an airport like Mount Holly, you never know what's going on there, and it may be something that really impacts the economic development of your community. Everybody wants to know what happened during COVID, and this is kind of a short snapshot of it in chart form. So this was our year-to-date. I give this slide to the board every month, and so the peach bars represent the best month ever for that, or the best traffic ever for that month. Anytime you see that green line above the peach bar, it means we set a monthly record. And so this is 2019's total, and we had 689,000 and change in terms of passengers. And you can see we set a whole bunch of records that month. This is the start of 2020. So you can see we had January over here and February, we set records that year. And everybody remembers what happened in March of 2020, right? So that's March. We had 2 good weeks, and then everybody started canceling. And for a couple of weeks, that's all my staff did. They answered the phone and helped people figure out how to cancel their flight. The airlines changed all their policies. They used to never let you change anything, and then because of the pandemic, they let you defer and change flights and things like that. Still didn't get your money back, but you could go later. And so here's April. You see how the bottom of that chart is 30,000? I never dreamed we'd ever go below 30,000. But we did, so I had to change the bottom of the graph and take it all the way down to 0.
Wow.
So in April of 2020, we had 2,804 passengers on and off. So 1,400 roughly got on airplanes, 1,400 got off. That is like, well, I think maybe in the 1940s we might have had a smaller number. Then things started to recover a little bit. The rest of the 2020 is the red line. You know, they tell you when you make graphics, never use red, right? Because it's an alarm. Well, that's an alarm. So it recovered a little bit. And then 2021 is the caramel colored line that kind of goes through here. And you can see right in this area, things are starting to pick up. And we actually convened a meeting of some of the key area employers and businesses that had done a lot of travel in the past. And, you know, like I think it was in the fall of 20, we lost Delta. They pulled out of Peoria completely. And they were saying, you know, call us when business travel picks back up. So we're thinking, okay, it's time to call them. And then the Delta variant hit. So that's the downturn right through here. We had the meeting in July. We went ahead and had it anyway because we established some really good connections with people, and it worked out. It was a good meeting. And then you can see in the fall of 2021, you had the Omicron variant that was keeping passenger traffic depressed a little bit. Then in 2022, you can see January is right there. Better than last year's January, but still not that great. This is another way to look at it. Let me go back a second. The blue line, this is 2019, so that's our record year. This blue line with the markers is the 5-year moving average, and that includes 2020. So that 5-year moving average used to be higher. And then this is kind of a different way of looking at it, where 0 would be the last 5 normal years. So stopping at the end of 2019. And this looks at, the blue line is 2020, and you can see there's January and February where we broke records. This is April, and then this is coming back a little bit. So this is 2021. You can see we had a steady increase, and things are getting better until the Delta variant kicked in, and things kind of plateaued down here for a while. And then in December of 2021, we were only like 7% below. So that was our best performance so far. And then January is back up here to what, 24% or something like that of normal. So not as great, but January is always a pretty terrible month for travel anyway, because everybody's back from the holidays, everybody's got to go back to work, back to school. And so we still have our work cut out for us. The other thing that's not really shown in this graph is who is traveling. And we don't have hard numbers on that because it's really expensive to contact each traveler. And the airlines know who's traveling, but they don't share that data with us. But you can kind of infer a lot of things, because Allegiant used to be about 25 to 30% of our traffic. They are now up around 50% of our traffic. And that shows you right there, because it's less than daily service. They go 2 to 4 times a week to most of their destinations. It shows you that the mix of travel has shifted over from a lot of business travel to mostly leisure travel. This is kind of an interesting process here. This is where do we fly to? So this was our route map in 2006. This was our route map in 2016, 2017. We're up to 12 destinations. You can see we have Florida pretty well covered, and we connected to a lot of business hubs here. In November of 2018, we lost Detroit, and that was because people didn't ride it enough. And I'll show you another graph later that will kind of explain that. But Detroit is the classic example of use it or lose it. So then this is our route map in 2019 when we set the record. And you can still see, Minneapolis and Atlanta. Those are the two Delta cities. And we've got a good mix of business hubs and leisure destinations. This is middle of 2020. And you can see the Atlanta and Minneapolis went away. But we picked up Nashville. We had worked out, before the pandemic hit, we had worked out with Allegiant to get the Nashville service. And this was really a big community effort because we made the case to them, but there's a lady I swim with and do laps in the morning, and her husband actually took out a Facebook ad and boosted it. And, community efforts like that really make a difference because the airline notices. They're like, hey, let's try this. So that was all before COVID. This was supposed to start in May of 2020. We're like, we just came off a 2,800 passenger month. There's no way they're going to start a new flight, right? We contacted them and said, hey, you're not really going through with this, are you? And they're like, heck yes, we are. What we didn't know was Allegiant had formed a new policy where they were going to come in behind where there were all kinds of seat reductions and flight reductions, and they're going to backfill that and try to capture those passengers. So that was their first step in Peoria of doing that. So we got the Nashville flight in May of last year. And this is our route map as of December, which is current. Not only did we get the Nashville flight, but Allegiant has announced 3 other new destinations. They're flying to Denver, they're flying to Sarasota, and to Fort Lauderdale. So Allegiant is now a bigger airline in Peoria and a bigger airline nationally than they were before the pandemic. So why is that important? So I'm going to go back to a pre-COVID map here. These are all the places in 2019 where you could go with one connection out of Peoria. So you fly to a hub, change planes, and you can go to all these places. It's a horrible graphic, but that kind of makes the point. Now, this next one, these are all the places that you could fly to in the world with one change of planes. If you add in a second change of planes, you could pretty much get to the whole world. If you add in a third change of planes, I'm not sure you really want to go to that place. My motto during the thick of the COVID crisis was one crisis per week. Because every federal agency you can imagine, every state agency you can imagine, they all went crazy. And so an example of that was the FAA Control Tower. So we're the only civilian airport outside of the city of Chicago in Illinois that has a 24-hour tower. And there's a couple of reasons why we have that, but the FAA wanted to reduce the hours of operation of the tower, which they periodically bring that up, because between about 11 a.m. and 4 a.m., we don't have enough takeoffs and landings to justify the tower. The reason this time was their preparations for COVID. In normal times, when you work as an air traffic controller, you might work the day shift one day, the night shift the next day, and whatever. They move you around all the time, and that's what's really stressful about being an air traffic controller, because your body never has time to adjust to the change in your circadian rhythms. So what they did to prepare for COVID impacts was they platooned everybody. So in the past, you would work, you never knew who you were going to work with, but now you work with the same people all the time. And so that way, if one person comes down with COVID, only that crew has to isolate. And so they wanted to reduce the number of hours that the tower would be open. And we figured, well, most of the other airports like us, they're open, most of the day, and they close at 11 p.m. They open back up at 6 a.m. No, they wanted to open at 10 a.m. and close at 6 p.m. Well, our schedule, even through COVID, is heavy on departures in the morning. You have a few scattered arrivals and departures in the middle of the day, and then heavy on arrivals in the evening. So between 10 and 6, those controllers would have nothing to do. So we had to push back and then explain the geometry of the airport to the FAA so that they would understand why that was a terrible deal. There's a thing called a runway visibility zone. So when you have multiple runways, so this is our main runway, 1331, it's 10,000 feet long. It's the longest runway in the state of Illinois outside of the city of Chicago. And then this is runway 422. So the runways are numbered after the compass heading you'd be flying, rounded off to the nearest 10 degrees and chop off the 0. So you now all have taken your first step towards achieving the aviation merit badge. You have to be able, when there's no control tower, you have to be able to see the other runway when you're taking off or landing on one runway. And the runway visibility zone, I've drawn it in there. That's what you have to be able to see. And you can see here that the new terminal, the old terminal, the engine hush house down here, and the parachute drying building from the Air National Guard, those things all penetrate the runway visibility zone. So we can't leave 2 runways open when the tower closes. And then there's another thing on the geometry of our long runway. It's not flat. It's very hilly. And the runway visibility zone, both the one down the runway and the one from one runway to another, they don't matter if there's a control tower because the controllers can see everything. So in this case, that's kind of the vertical profile of that runway. The elevation above sea level here is 642 or 622. So there's 20 feet of difference between those 2 locations, and there's a hill in the middle. So if you're at one end of the runway on that runway, you can't see all the way down to the other end. And this is this area here is our general aviation area. And right over here, kind of off the map, is the air cargo area. So you could end up with a situation where you have a little Cessna going head to head with a 757 on the same runway. It would never happen when the tower's open, but if the tower's closed and somebody tunes their radio incorrectly, you could have that. There was a crash in Quincy. I don't remember the year, but it was probably in the early 2000s or late 90s, where a King Air got together with a Piper Cherokee with the same issue of 2 runways, and it had a bunch of fatalities. So, and this is obviously not to scale. You can probably tell that, but the 747s aren't, or 757s aren't 1,200 feet long. And so that we had to document all this stuff and prove it to the FAA, and then they kept our tower open 24 hours a day. So we've had some successes with air service development, even in the midst of the pandemic. But one of our biggest challenges is leakage. And so I hope you didn't think that I was going to come here and give you all good news and not lecture you at all. This is the lecture part. So leakage is when you live in an area and you buy a ticket, but you start your trip from somewhere else. And the airlines know this, so because they have your credit card information and they know where the zip code is on your credit card account. What we did a couple of studies. This is our service area map, and this is the area that we're kind of claiming as our territory. So it goes from Peoria about halfway to Bloomington. There's Bloomington's area. This is kind of owned by Indianapolis. There's Springfield. There's Moline, and Chicago being the big dog, they get kind of that area. And this is based on data that we researched through credit cards. We have to buy that data, so it's expensive, and we only do this study about every 5 years. There's some areas on here where they don't, like in this area, they don't really break for any one airport, so it's kind of a contention area where we're kind of battling for passengers. And then this is kind of the same thing. And so we looked at where do these people live and where are they getting on airplanes. We retain about 58% of the tickets that are sold in our little circle our little circle area. And that number has been staying steady. On the left is the pie chart from 2013, and on the right is 2017. And we're getting ready to do this again this year because it's 5 years. The red slice is Bloomington. So these are people in the Peoria area who are buying tickets and getting on airplanes in Bloomington. This light blue slice is O'Hare, and the rest are kind of not that significant. You can see our percentage did not change from 1 year to the next, or from 1 year to 5 years later. Bloomington really decreased, and that reflects the purchase of AirTran Airlines by Southwest. The reason they bought that airline was they wanted the gates that AirTran had in Atlanta. That's the quickest way to get them. You buy the airline. And then AirTran was operating 717s, which everybody else knows by MD-80s. And they basically, that's not an airplane that Southwest will want to operate. They only operate 737s. So they shut them down, but now they have the real estate in Atlanta. And so the leakage to Bloomington kind of went away when AirTran went away. But those people, we don't know if it's the same people, but the proportion, of people getting on airplanes in Peoria stayed the same, and O'Hare's increased. So we're very curious what's going to happen in the study this year because we have Delta departing. We want to find out how many people are being brand loyal and staying with Delta and driving over there. I don't know what that number is going to be, but we're going to try to find out. In general, it's more concerning to me if somebody's driving to O'Hare than it is if they're driving to Bloomington. I mean, I don't want them to drive to Bloomington, but it does more damage to both Bloomington and Peoria if you're driving to O'Hare. So we have, in a good year, not impacted by COVID, we have about 800 departing passengers a day. In 2019, it went up over 900. We still have around 200 people a day that are going to another airport, mostly to Chicago. And so that's kind of a good news, bad news story. It's bad news because we're losing those passengers, but it's good news because that's a pool of people that we can draw to increase our traffic. So all we got to do is figure out how to get these people to stay home. If we had zero leakage and we're setting records, we're done. You're not going to stimulate ticket buying. But if you, aside from like a new airline like Allegiant or something like that, but if that leakage is our potential for future growth. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about Detroit. I mentioned that. Load factor is the number of people on a plane versus the number of seats that are there. So this is an old chart. It only goes up to about 2017. But you want to be above 80% because if your numbers aren't up around 80% or better, the airline's not happy with those loads and that flight is in danger. So this is what happened with Detroit. The gap is when there was no service, right? So again, this is the 80% line right here. And so these are good years, and you can see Detroit never got there. And this is a classic example of use it or lose it. People didn't support the Detroit flights enough, and they went away. And we were pushing, people to use Detroit. When I had to go to Las Vegas, if I was not on Allegiant, I was on Delta to Detroit because it's just about like connecting over Chicago, except it's not congested like Chicago is, so you don't have all those problems. And I timed it one time. I'm sitting there in the window seat, and I saw when we crossed over O'Hare, and I timed it till we landed at Detroit. It was 15 minutes. And then the flight back wasn't that much different either. Most of the flight time in the schedule from O'Hare to Peoria is actually taxi time. Okay, so what's going on with the airlines? You can see that the airlines from this chart, United is about 84% the size that they were in 2019. Delta is about 83% the size that they were in 2019. American's about 92%. And that kind of follows with what they did at our airport. American maintained all three of their hubs, Charlotte, Dallas, and Chicago. United kept their flights to Chicago, but we're down to 14 a week instead of the 20 or so that we should have been, 2024 per week that we should be at. Allegiant has grown. So they're 20% bigger than they were before COVID. And what they're doing is they're backfilling capacity in where the other airlines have pulled out. So where are we? So 2019 would be 100%, right? And in 2021, we're about 86, 87% of the seats available that we had before the COVID crisis. So that's pretty decent recovery, except when you break it down further, and if you look at the business airlines, American and United, we're only at about 60% of the seats available that we were prior to COVID. So we're just now starting to hear from some of our business contacts that, hey, we're traveling more, we want to get places, and we're having trouble finding seats and connections to be able to do that. And so if you have stories like that, please make sure that I get them, because we can take that to the airlines and say, okay, it's time to increase your capacity in Peoria, and here's why. So what happens if you do fly locally? Rochester, Minnesota is a great example. Mayo Clinic is the major employer there. And they were having really bad leakage to Minneapolis. It's not that long of a drive, and people were driving to get there. So Mayo actually instituted a policy that said, hey, with certain exceptions of what your job is and where you have to go, you have to fly out of Rochester. And within a month, United opened service in Rochester. Delta added flights to 2 more hubs, and their traffic grew 27% within, a couple of months, 6 months. So that's the kind of impact that can happen. So if you want more destinations, larger airplanes, more frequency, you have to use what we have. I'm under no illusions that some of you are driving to Chicago to get on a plane. You've probably heard me say this before, but now when you do it, I hope you feel really guilty. So this is what leakage costs you. We crunched these numbers. So we've got these airports across the top, our different competitors. And if you fly out of Peoria, you're not paying for parking, and none of these categories apply. What it boils down to, if you're driving to O'Hare and you're going on a business trip, that drive is costing you $389 before you pay your first penny for airfare. You may not count all the costs. Like a lot of people, I even had a letter to the editor tell me my numbers were wrong because it doesn't cost that much to drive. Well, it doesn't cost that much in cash to pay for gas, but you're using up a portion of that last oil change you got. You're using up wear and tear on your car. You're going to replace parts, tires, those things. We used all standard like IRS and AAA kind of numbers to calculate all this stuff. So even if you're just hopping over to Bloomington, that round trip is costing you $116 by the time before you buy your ticket. So this would be our advice. I love it when people I know tell me that they drove to Chicago and they got caught in a traffic jam on the way up or the way back. And I'm like, search it right. So we can't, people like to say that the airport has to get flights to this place or that place. If I could pick where we fly, we would have direct service to Rhinelander, Wisconsin, because I like to go up there for vacation. I'd probably be the only person on that flight twice a year, but you too? I can't believe, like, in the last 3 weeks, all the people I know that have been posting pictures on Facebook from Minocqua, Wisconsin. And that's the big difference between Peoria and Evansville. Peoria knows where Minocqua is. Evansville doesn't know where Wisconsin is. But we need 80 of you people to do 1% of the work. You can't count on one company or one employer to do, the heavy lifting on this. It's got to be a community-based effort. And clicking here.
Oh, sorry, because I saw chat. Sorry. Try now.
There we go. So this is before we get to questions, do you have that other file?
Yeah.
To run?
Yep.
You guys are the test. Makes you want to go take flying lessons, right? So at this point, I would, if I have time left, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Could you explain what backfill means? You said that for Allegiant. I don't understand what backfill means.
So the airlines have had a certain amount of capacity in 2019, and because of COVID, they reduced that capacity. And Allegiant has made an effort to come in and make up the difference in that capacity that was reduced. So they're kind of coming in behind the reductions from the other airlines and providing capacity in terms of seats that was there before. It's not exactly the same because Allegiant is flying to, they don't do any connecting flights, so it's all point to point and it's all to a fun place to go. And it's less than daily service, which means it's like twice a week. And so it's not the same kind of capacity, but it is capacity to replace what was once there.
So could you comment on airfares over the last few years? Have they gone up or down, or which direction of it?
In general, airfares they were on their way up, but because of COVID, there was downward pressure to try to stimulate travel and get people back in seats, and it's starting to creep up again. One thing that's happened is, like if you get on a plane today, you're going to see that the airplane is full. There are not a bunch of empty seats flying around. That happened for the first couple of weeks. In probably April and May, there were a bunch of empty seats flying around, but not anymore because they reduced the capacity, reduced the number of flights and seats to what they could, justify. So airplanes are back up over 80% capacity again.
So are the airfares about the same? They were 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, they're pretty much the same.
Gene, when I was on the board, we fought this leakage problem all the time. That is an excellent illustration of what it costs to drive to Chicago. Why don't you promote that more?
We're here promoting it today.
I mean, on a bigger level.
We have that chart on our website, and this is part of the problem is that if you just throw that number out there without explaining it, people don't believe it. Because nobody believes that it costs you $389 to drive to Chicago and back. So when you explain it, then they start to go, oh, okay, well, I can see your point.
Okay, if you go to Peoria Charter, it's not going to cost you that much. How much is that hurting you, that Peoria Charter service to right there to the terminal?
Yeah, not much at all.
Okay.
Because it's a different market. The people who ride Peoria Charter to go to Chicago are not usually getting on airplanes, and it's just a different market and different reason for travel. Just to give you an idea, in 2019, at the peak of our seat availability, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 seats every day that went to Chicago. You know how many people went to Chicago and got off the plane to go to Chicago? About 8 people a day. So, again, those are 80% full airplanes, and those people are going to Chicago and changing planes to go somewhere else. That's why I'll probably answer the question before anybody asks it. The rail thing that's going on, that's not, I don't think, going to impact us at all either, because that's a completely different purpose of travel, method of travel, and a different market. So I don't think it's going to impact us at all.
So I do have some Zoom comments. One person commented they love flying out of Peoria, just need to get Delta back. Another person said they love flying out of Peoria just because it's so convenient and relaxing compared to going in and out of Chicago. One of the questions I've got is, we did a charter flight out of St. Louis for vacation. Knowing how much of a pain it is to get to Chicago or St. Louis, have you guys ever looked at trying to get charters for, get people like not go to Chicago and just something different?
We get charters all the time. The regulations on who can arrange a charter, how they handle the money, we actually looked at doing them ourselves, but it's regulatorily prohibitive for an airport to sponsor a charter. Most of the charters that we have go to casino towns, because I guess if you go to the boat here in Peoria, you get tired of that slot machine and you want to go pull a handle in Reno or something like that. But that's where the bulk of our charters are. We see a lot of, and those are charters that board through the terminal building. There are many more charters that board through Byerly that still count as commercial passengers, and we log them and everything. But it's different security regulations and things like that. But we do have charters all the time. So next time that you see a group sponsoring a charter, you can ask them to send it out of Peoria. The honor flight is essentially a charter. Is there a question?
Yeah, so you talked about the numbers changing already, where you're seeing about 50% of the flights being for leisure. Have you talked to businesses that don't have the intention to go back to the way that they traveled before with telecommuting and that? And so do you see the dynamic changing where you're looking to grab more of those leisure travelers than business, or what does that look like for the future?
Thank you for mentioning my nightmare. No, in all seriousness, though, that is going to be a challenge for us. And what I'm hoping is that the president of Delta Airlines is correct. Because he said you're going to Zoom and you're going to telecommute until such point as your competitor goes to meet with your client, takes them out for dinner, and they get the sale and you don't. That's when you're going to start traveling. So I'm hoping that happens quickly. But no, we have talked to businesses and we have talked about that issue, and we're hoping that they will start resuming travel. We've talked to a couple of major employers in the area, and one of the encouraging signs was that approval level for trips has been pushed down. So that domestic trips, it used to be the C-suite, and now it's the VP level. And any domestic travel used to be the VP level, and now it's down to regular managers. So we're hopeful about that. And it's just something we can't control, but we're hoping will eventually work itself out.
Gene, do you know or have the data and able to share the data on what Caterpillar Travel's been doing in the area?
I don't want to, tell tales, but I think I just said that. So, yeah, I mean, they're picking back up. They're picking back up, and that information came from one of their people that sits on my board. So, but they're starting to pick back up, traveling a little bit more, but it's not back to what it was.